Hello, thank you for joining us for Part C, which will continue the Italian Renaissance in some of Northern Europe, focusing on women's clothing and accessories for both sexes. Here we have a fashionable Italian woman at the beginning of her day in her basic undergarments, which include the camicia, also known as chemise if you are in France, a corset, and a petticoat. Like with the men, the camicia was white linen, more like sort of a nightshirt. The corset was used for support. In time, corsets will be very important for bust support, but for now they're more to give an hourglass figure. The sleeves are usually detachable, and we can see it has laces. It could be cinched to reduce the weight line and get that hourglass figure, which we'll talk about that in a little bit. Corset, by the way, is a French variation. The word corset means little body, so you can see what the purpose is right there. And then, of course, the petticoat, which is a separate skirt meant to be worn under other skirts, tied at the waist. So here we see a basic outfit, a dress with a tight-fitting bodice and a low square around neckline. As you can see, with the secularism, we have more and more of that décolletage. So we can see that here. Sleeves, puffed and slash. Now the skirt, we're going to start calling this an overskirt. You might wear a skirt with a separate bodice or part of a gown, but now you're going to see a bodice and an overskirt, and the petticoat is going to be the underskirt. And a lot of times we'll have a slit in front. You will see many of those to allow the petticoat to show through. Overskirt, underskirt is going to become very popular. Here we see variations, a high-waisted bodice, a skirt made of taffeta. You can see, let me get my little marker here. You can see where I'm curving, that's the underskirt, that's the petticoat showing through, and it's decorative. Also, you can start to see we have these sleeves, kind of tubes, two separate tubes, not connected to the bodice, not connected to anything, that are tied on, and the chemise or camicia is puffed out. These are called finestrella sleeves. Here's some examples also. Overskirts cut on the sides as well. Here, this is right here, that's the petticoat, skirt, and then cut on the sides with an inset. And yeah, I don't know why I put this. The bodice was a separate piece on some dresses, on most dresses. This one is a little different because she doesn't have a separate one. This one does. That's usually the case. Bodice separate from the overskirt. Lower class women, merchants, laborers, so forth, you can see we have some overskirt, underskirt combinations, finestrella sleeves, a variation particularly among the trades classes to puff the chemise out under the separate bodice, as you can see here on the right. Here you see some formal robes worn over the skirt here, usually with short sleeves. We have this interesting variation you see on the right with these hanging balloon sleeves. So they're kind of hanging sleeves, but they're also balloon sleeves. But there's no way she's going to get her hands in, unless she bunges it up and it'll look really silly. Hell, it looks kind of silly now, to be honest. Excuse me. Sorry about that. I swallowed my water wrong, so I had to stop and cough for a moment. Here's a female version of the Hoopaland. You can see it is similar to the male formal version of the period, with some noticeable changes. High belted, plenty of décolletage, low neckline, and then most importantly, this is the sleeve. Just enormous pendant sleeves there. So very distinctive and very expensive. Now in Northern Europe, we start to see the corset become more form-fitting. Two stiffened layers of fabric glued together, and into these pockets, these channels you can see here, are inserted busks, these stiffeners made of bone or wood and slightly curved. So when you cinch it, the busk would cinch. When you cinch the corset, it makes the waist and torso even smaller. So we start to see the hourglass shape, which we will see in a little bit is very important. Now also look at this. Let's talk a little bit about this as we can. You can see here still one piece at the bust line. So, and even you can see in this dress form, there's no bust really. So it will become bust support. over time in the 17th, 18th century, but for now it's not taking into account the bust. It's mostly the cinching in the waist is the key. Northern gown, overskirt, bodice, overskirt, petticoat, wide slit on the overskirt, maybe gathered up so we can see the decorative lining as well as the underskirt. Often the overskirt was taffeta or silk. Sleeves, always detachable, usually contrasting fabric. Here we see more fenestrella sleeves, hard to say sometimes. Slashing, popular in the early part of the century. Also this fur lining you can see over here on the right of ermine on the sleeves and on the overskirt. Here we have, now this is different than slashing. This is a process called painting. So let's see if I can make this. So you see here we have slashing, but what the camisea is not pulled through. This is the silk lining of the bodice is pulled through. So that's where painting is different from slashing. Also, this wasn't slashing. I didn't really mention it before. These are eaglets, which are also tips on your laces. Same thing. Okay, remember we talked about in the last section the Little Ice Age in those colder climates? Well, there's a problem with having no low necklines, is that your neck and shoulders will get cold. So we have these insets, usually sheer linen, called partlet, that can be inserted into the décolletage of your bodice. German women. You saw the German men were kind of outlandish. Well, the German women were going to be right in there with them, and these ostentatious, showing how wealthy you are, kind of big dresses with big hats, lots of feathers, over full skirts. Just living life. Okay, by the mid-century, though, we start to see the corsets are becoming, with the bust, are becoming more sophisticated. So we start to see this hourglass shape, which is very attractive, which was desired. So we start to see, again, what happens is if you have a corset right here, right, she's wearing a corset, you take the bodice and you can elongate it. And what that'll do is elongate the body, and then you'll have the fuller skirt to help sell the whole package. Also, she would mention by mid-century the Spanish style. Remember I was talking about the gold embroidery over black fabric. Most distinctive dress to come from Spain is the ropa, which has this high collar open at the front. You can see that gold petticoat underneath, no waist, and these padded rolls at the top of the sleeve, just stuffed and kind of poofed out here. This is the ropa. It's not, let's be honest, it's not an attractive look. The Spanish didn't go in for that. They were very Catholic. They didn't appreciate that sort of, showing of the human form, so they blotted it out as best they could. But the other Europeans said, not so fast. We like the Spanish style. It's attractive. You guys are powerful and rich. We don't want to piss you off. We're going to do it, but we're going to add our touches so it looks more attractive. We're going to do the painting and the slashing and the hanging sleeves and the corset and so forth. And added to this, we start to see also another style variation is the conical skirt. You can see here, not just full, but conical. And that's because of the Spanish farthingale. It's a petticoat with hoops. As you can see here, just it's put on underneath. It's usually an under petticoat. There may be two petticoats. There's the farthingale and then the decorative petticoat underneath. But you can see here on the right where you start to see it even more accentuates that hourglass shape. But here's the thing, because of that conical skirt, you might want to balance the silhouette, so we start to see padded sleeves added. Here we see one with padded sleeves to kind of balance that out, and then the overskirt is gathered up to show the pretty little petticoat and the lining of the overskirt itself. Another new feature introduced by the Spaniards, because they like the high collars, they want everybody else to have high collars, so they wouldn't be showing off all this cleavage and décolletage. So they tried to make that attractive collar, and that was the ruff, made of starched linen and shaped by a heated metal cylinder. You can see in this picture here, I know it's a satirical drawing with a demon, a monkey, I think it is, doing it, but the The technique is accurate there. That little metal rod, similar to the one the Romans used, calamistrum, I believe, to use to kind of reshape. Because over time, your ruff would unstarch and start to be floppy. So you would go to a salon and get your ruffs reshaped and stiffened. Okay, I think we got time for some jewelry real quick. Women, pendants, pearl necklaces, very popular. Heavy religious necklaces with the Spanish gown as seen here, just these reliquaries, and jeweled collars. So here we have something of the Ferrianaire. I've been looking at pronunciations of it. I suck at it. Ferrianaire. There, that's what we're going with. You'll see more of this into the 19th century. You can see it's just that little chain of metal, maybe with a little pendant on it. Also pomanders, which are small metal orbs filled with perfumes. People didn't always smell great, and if you're in cities, the sewer lines are not that great or non-existent. So if you need something to smell good, you would just hold up your little perfume bottle. And of course, fans. Men like big gold chains, big bling if you are a important merchant. Cameo pendants down here, also desired. Footwear is interesting. We get the pointed shoes at first, like the poulaines, and eventually they begin to wound off and then square off. Becomes fashionable. You'll see here at the bottom you have these squarish slash slippers known as the duckbill or lion's paw slippers. The square one right here becomes very indicative of the period, characteristic of the period. This is interesting. This is the chapine. This is a very distinctive shoe worn by women of Venice, because Venice, it's a canal, so the streets get wet and flooded, and you get these beautiful clothes. You don't want to get them messed up, so you have to walk on stilts, basically. A leather slipper attached to a wooden clog, sometimes going over a foot in height. These are about 6 inches or so, so they're not too bad. Chapines. Quickly on hair and hair dresses, longish, back of neck for shoulders for men. If you're a Northern European, you like your beards or long mustaches. Chaperone hats, sugarloaf hats, soft berets with a smaller node brim. This down at the bottom is a French bonnet, a pillbox hat. That was popular. Women wore hair long and braided in loose or gently coiled tresses. Might wear it up in a tightly coiled bun and covered with a coif for northern women. Speaking of coif, one of the most common in Italy, a simple cloth cap. We say here a coif, which is at the top. At the center here we have a coif with lappets, and then we have a gable coif. Coif basically is just putting a piece of fabric over your head. But then you can do things like gable it or lappets, if you like. The Flemish cap, mob cap, I think it's also called, very popular. And then in the 16th century, we start to see that it looks sort of like a Moulin Rouge hat. Stiff brims, lots of plumage, particularly in Germany, very popular. 2 specialty costumes, the Doge of Venice. One of the most powerful, this is one of the most powerful rulers in Venice, one of the most powerful rulers in Europe. Official robes of state, a fur cape, long robe with wide sleeves, and a stiffened Phrygian cap. So that was the official costume of state for the Doge. And then we had mentioned the Venetian Courtesan. Very interesting way of dressing. Courtesans were not merely prostitutes. They were escorts. That they were expected to be well versed and well spoken in the arts and sciences. So they were a courtesan, a companion. So they had this very distinctive dress. I think it was even codified into law that this is how a courtesan would dress. So very low bodice, very high waistline, lightweight linen skirt, and you can see, first the sleeves are attached with maybe additional fenestrella tied on, and then, interestingly enough, she wore breeches, padded and slashed, and of course the chapines. So a very distinctive look for the Venetian courtesan. This is the end of Part C. Thank you. In Part D, we will start with we will do the Tudors.